I've never been good at sitting still, and even when I'm sitting still, my mind is racing. I've built my life around my own restlessness in a lot of ways. School was always easy for me. I never once remember feeling challenged. I have a photographic memory, so if I glanced at something once, I could recall it for a test. I was reading on a 12th grade level in the sixth. I could do math in my head, but I had no interest in sitting in a classroom all day. When I was hustling, I wasn't the kid who worked his home corner in eyeshot of his own bedroom window. I stayed on the road. I love New York more than probably anything else in the world, but I'm thankful that I got away at a young age to see some of the world outside of Marcy. It opened my perspective on a lot of things, including my taste in music. People in other parts of the country think New Yorkers are snobs about hip hop and defensive about their position as the birthplace of the art. That's unfair, but being outside of the city so much definitely helped me avoid having any kind of narrow sense of what rap music could sound like. For instance, the famous East Coast West Coast beef in hip hop in the 1990s was based on a lot of things: personal animosities, unsolved shootings, disrespect at award shows, women, and other assorted bullshit. But as far as I was concerned, one thing it wasn't about was the quality of the music. I was spending a lot of time in Washington, D.C. and Maryland when West Coast hip hop, led by NWA and then Cube, Dre, and Snoop, started to sweep the entire country. I was a Brooklyn MC to the bone. I wasn't trying to pretend otherwise, but I also got why people loved NWA. I started listening to all kinds of rappers from all over the country, including the Southern rappers and West Coast MCs like Too Short, whose lazy seeming flows were the opposite of my fast rapping style at the time and completely contrary to what most New York MCs were doing. I loved the variety that was developing outside of the world of New York hip hop and absorbed elements of all of it, which helped me enrich my own style. When you step outside of school and have to teach yourself about life, you develop a different relationship to information. I've never been a purely linear thinker. You can see it in my rhymes. My mind is always jumping around, restless, making connections, mixing and matching ideas rather than marching in a straight line. That's why I'm always stressed and focused. My thoughts chase each other from room to room in my head if I let them. So sometimes I have to slow myself down. I've never been one to write perfect little short stories in my rhymes like some other MCs. It's not out of a sense of preference, just that rhymes come to me in a different way, as a series of connecting verbal ideas rather than full fledged stories. But that's a good match for the way always approached life. I've always believed in motion and action, in following connections wherever they take me, and in not getting entrenched. My life has been more poetry than prose, more about unpredictable leaps and links than simple steady movement or worse, stagnation. It's allowed me to stay open to the next thing without feeling held back preconceived notion by a preconceived notion of what I'm supposed to be doing next. Stories have ups and downs and moments of development followed by moments of climax. The storyteller has to keep it all together, which is an incredible skill. But poetry is all climax. Every word and line pops with the same energy as the whole. Even the spaces between the words can feel charged with potential energy. It fits my style to rhyme with high stakes, riding on every word, and to fill every pause with pressure and possibility. And maybe I just have ADD, but I also like my rhymes to stay loose enough to follow whatever ideas hijack my train of thought, just like I like my mind to stay loose enough to absorb everything around me. You want war, then it's war's gonna be. I was in a London club when I first heard Punjabi MC's Mundian to Bach Key. It wasn't like anything else playing. The bass line was propulsive and familiar, but it took me a second to realize it was from the theme song of Knight Rider, a bass line Busta Rhymes had also recently used. On top of the crazy driving bass line were fluttering drums and this urgent high pitched rhythmic strumming, which came, as it turns out, from a tumbi, a traditional South Asian instrument. I didn't know all that when I heard it in the club. All I knew was it was something totally fresh. It felt like world music in the best sense, like a bunch of sounds from different parts of the globe joined up like an all star team. People in the club heard it and went crazy. I did too. I tracked down the artist and called the next day to see if I could do a remix of the song. It was 2003, early in the Iraq invasion, early enough that people in America still mostly supported the war. Bush had flown onto the aircraft carrier with the big mission accomplished banner, and people were thinking it was an easy win for Team America. But I'd been traveling all over the world and knew that there was a different perception outside of the United States. Whatever sympathy we had after 9/11 was vanishing. I was able to pick up on some of the arguments that weren't being made on American television. I was one of the people who thought 9/11 was an opportunity to rethink our character as a nation. With the war in Iraq, it felt like we were squandering a window of goodwill. It wasn't just that it was a war. As Barack Obama said, it was clearly a dumb war. When I started working on my remix of Mundian Tubaki, we called it Beware of the Boys, which was the Punjabi title translated into English. I wanted to make it a party song, which was the mindset I was in when I first heard it. But the international feeling of the track, which some people thought was Arabic, moved me into a different direction. So I dropped in a line against the Iraq War. That got me thinking about the recent history of America in the Middle East. So I added something about the Iran Contra scandal in the 80s, which brought me back to the whole era of big drug kingpins and my own life back then, copping and selling just like Ali North. I compared Osama bin Laden to Ronald Reagan and their indifference to the destruction each of them brought to the city I lived in. I was wading into deeper waters with every connection, so I stopped myself and took it back to the club. But for now, mommy, turn it around and let your boy play. My father was crazy for detail. I get that from him. Even though we didn't live together after I was 9, there are some things he instilled in me early that I never lost. He'd walk my cousin Beehi and me through Times Square. This is when it was still known as 40 Deuce. And we'd people watch. Back then, Times Square was crazy grimy. Pimps, prostitutes, dealers, addicts, gangs, all the shit from the 70s that other people saw in black exploitation flicks. Manhattan had in living color. Kids from Harlem and Hell's Kitchen used Times Square as their backyard. They'd be out there deep, running in and out of karate flicks, break dancing. But for Brooklyn kids like me and Beehi, Midtown Manhattan might as well have been a plane ride away. My father would take us to Lindy's and we get these big ass steak fries. We would sit in the restaurant looking out the window onto the streets and play games that exercised our observational skills. Like my pops would make us guess a woman's dress size. There was nothing he missed about a person. He was really good about taking in all the nonverbal clues people give you to their character, how to listen to the matrix of a conversation, to what a person doesn't say. For my pops, it was just as important to take in places as people. He wanted me to know my own neighborhood inside and out. When we'd go to visit my aunt and uncle and cousins, my father would give me the responsibility of leading, even though I was the youngest. When I was walking with him, he always walked real fast. He said that way if someone's following you, they'll lose you. And he expected me not to only keep up with him, but to remember the details of the things I was passing. I had to know which bodega sold laundry detergent and who only stocked candy and chips, which bodega was owned by Puerto Ricans, and which one was run by Arabs who take pictures of themselves holding AKs to the plexiglass where they kept the loose candy. He was teaching me to be confident and aware of my surroundings. There's no better survival skill you could teach a boy in the ghetto, and he did it demonstratively, not by sitting me down and saying, yo, always look around at where you are, but by showing me. Without necessarily meaning to, he taught me how to be an artist. I give you the news with a twist. It's just his ghetto point of view. That same kind of close observation is at the heart of rap. Great rappers from the earliest days distinguished themselves by looking closely at the world around them and describing it in a clever, artful way. And then they went further than just describing it, they started commenting on it in a critical way. Rap's first great subjects were ego tripping and partying, but before long it turned into a tool for social commentary. It was kind of a natural move, really. The 1970s were a time when black art in general was being used as a tool for social change, where it was in the poetry of people like the Last Poets, or in the R&B of Marvin Gaye or Donny Hathaway, or in movies like Shaft. And politics had a real cultural angle too. The Black Panthers weren't just about revolution and Marxism, they were also about changing style and language. Jesse Jackson recited poems like I Am Somebody to school children of my generation. Art and politics and culture were all mixed up together. So it was almost obligatory that any popular art included some kind of political message. Some early rap was explicitly political, like Africa Bambaata's Zulu Nation movement, but other rappers played it safe and non-specific. They throw in a line about peace or supporting your brother man or staying in school or whatever. It took a while before rappers as a whole really sharpened their commentary, but again, it was hard not to. There was so much to comment about if your eyes were open to what was going on around you. There was a general squalor of the ghetto, which got aired out in early songs like Run DMC's first hit, It's Like That, or The Message by Melly Mel. But over time, rappers started really going in on specific issues. Crooked cops were attacked by groups like NWA. Drug dealers were targeted by KRS-One. Drug addicts were mocked by Brand Nubian. Ice Cube called out Uncle Tom's. Groups like Poor Righteous Teachers denounced shady churches with bootleg preachers. Queen Latifah was pushing back against misogyny. Salt and Pepper were rallying around safe sex. Public Enemy recorded manifestos on their albums addressing a dozen different issues. You could name practically any problem in the hood, and there'd be a rap song for you. The hip hop generation never gets credit for it, but those songs changed things in the hood. They were political commentary, but they weren't based on theories or books. They were based on reality, on close observation of the world we grew up in. The songs were moralistic, but they created a stigma around certain kinds of behavior just by describing them truthfully and with clarity. One of the things we corrected was the absent father karma our father's generations created. We made it some real bitch shit to bounce on your kids. Whether it was Ed OG and the Bulldogs with Be a Father to Your Child, or Big mixing Rage with Double Entendre, Pop Duke left Mom Duke, the faggot took the bat way. We as a generation made it shameful not to be there for your kids. I'm talking about real shit. Them people's playing. Artists of all kinds have a platform, and if they're any good, have a clearer vision of what's going on in the world around them. In my career, I've never set out to make songs that function as public service announcements, not even the song Public Service Announcement, with a few exceptions, one of which is the song Meet the Parents. But in honoring the lesson of my father, I to pay attention, and the lesson of hip hop, which is to tell the truth. I've been able to create my own kind of social commentary. Artists can have greater access to reality. They can see patterns and details and connections that other people distracted by the blur of life might miss. Just sharing that truth can be a very powerful thing. I don't remember exactly where I was in August 2005, but at the end of that month, I was mostly in front of the television like most other people, transfixed and upset by the story of Hurricane Katrina. Most Americans were horrified by what was happening down there. But I think for Black people, we took it a little more personally. I've been to shanty towns in Angola that taught me that what we consider to be crushing poverty in the United States has nothing to do with what we have materially. Even in the projects, we're rich compared to some people in other parts of the world. I met people in those shanty towns who lived in one room houses with no running water, who had to pay a neighbor to get water to go to the bathroom. Those kids in Angola played ball on a court surrounded by open sewage. And while they knew it was bad, they didn't realize just how fucked up it was. It was shocking. And I know there are parts of the world even worse off than that. The worst thing about being poor in America isn't the deprivation. In fact, I never associated Marcy with poverty when I was a kid. I just figured we lived in an apartment, that my brother and I shared a room, and that we were close, whether we wanted to be or not, with our neighbors. It wasn't until the sixth grade at PS 168 when my mother took us on a field trip. When my teacher took us on a field trip to her house and I realized we were poor. I have no idea what my teacher's intentions were, whether she was trying to inspire us or if she actually thought visiting her Manhattan brownstone with her view of Central Park qualified as a school trip. But that's when it registered to me that my family didn't have as much. We definitely didn't have the same refrigerator she had in her kitchen, one that had two levers on the outer door, one for the water and the other for ice cubes. Poverty is relative. One of the reasons inequality gets so deep in this country is that everyone wants to be rich. That's the American ideal. Poor people don't like talking about poverty because even though they might live in the projects surrounded by other poor people and have like $10 in the bank, they don't like to think of themselves as poor. It's embarrassing. When you're a kid, even in the projects, one kid will mercilessly snap on another kid over minor material differences, even though, by the American standard, they're both broke as shit. The burden of poverty isn't just that you don't always have the things you need, it's the feeling of being embarrassed every day for your life, and you do anything to lift that burden. As kids, we didn't complain about being poor. We talked about how rich we were going to be and made moves to get the lifestyle we aspired to by any means we could. And as soon as we had a little money, we were eager to show it. I remember coming back home from doing work out of state with my boys in a caravan of Lexuses that we parked right in the middle of Marcy. I ran up to my mom's apartment to get something and looked out the window and saw those three new Lexuses gleaming in the sun and thought, man, we doing it. In retrospect, yeah, that was kind of ignorant, but at the time, I could just feel that stink and shame of being broke lifting off of me, and it felt beautiful. The sad shit is that you never really shake it all the way off, no matter how much money you get. Some get left behind, some get chosen. I watched the coverage of the hurricane, but it was painful. Helicopters swooping over rooftops with people begging to be rescued. The helicopters would leave with a dramatic photo, but didn't bother to pick up the person on the roof. George Bush doing his flyby and declaring that the head of FEMA was doing a heck of a job. The news media would show a man running down the street, arms piled high with diapers or bottles of water, and call him a looter, with no context for why he was doing what he was doing. I'm sure there were a few idiots stealing plasma TVs, but even that has a context: anger, trauma. It wasn't like they were stealing TVs so they could go home and watch the game. I mean, where were they going to plug them shits in? As the days dragged on and the images got worse and worse, old ladies in wheelchairs dying in front of the Superdome, I kept thinking to myself, this can't be happening in a wealthy country. Why isn't anyone doing anything? Kanye caught a lot of heat for coming on the telethon and saying George Bush doesn't care about black people, but I backed him 100% on it, if only because he was expressing a feeling that was bottled up in a lot of our hearts. It didn't feel like Katrina was just a natural disaster that arbitrarily swept through a corner of the United States. Katrina felt like something that was happening to black people specifically. I know all sorts of people in Louisiana and Mississippi got washed out too and saw their lives destroyed. But in America, we process that sort of thing as a tragedy. When it happens to Black people, it feels like something else, like history rerunning its favorite loop. It wasn't just me. People saw that Katrina shit, heard the newscasters describing the victims as refugees in their own country, waited in vain for the government to step in and rescue those people who were dying right in front of our eyes, and we took it personally. I got angry, but more than that, I just felt hurt. In moments like that, it all starts coming back to you. Slavery, images of Black people in suits and dresses getting beaten on a bridge to Selma, the whole ugly story you sometimes want to think is over. And then it's back, like it never left. I felt hurt in a personal way for those people floating on cars and waving on the roofs of their shotgun houses, crying into the cameras for help, being left on their porches. Maybe I felt some sense of shame that we'd let this happen to our brothers and sisters. Eventually, I hit the off button on the remote control. I went numb. So I got rich and gave back. To me, that's a win win. It's crazy when people think that just because you have some money and white people start to like you, that you transcend race. People try this shit all the time with successful Black people, even with someone like me, who was plenty Black when I was on the corner. It's like they're trying to separate you from the pack, make you feel like you're the good one. It's the old house nigga feel nigga tactic. But even if you do get it into your head that somehow you're exceptional, that you've created some distance between where you are and where you're from, things like Hurricane Katrina snap you right out of it. I couldn't forget that those were my kin out there in New Orleans, and that, forget the government, I was supposed to do something to help them. I got together with Puffy and we donated $1 million to the relief effort, but we donated it to the Red Cross, which is barely different from donating to the government itself. The same government that failed those people the first time. Who knows how much of that money actually made it to the people on the ground? It also made me think of the bigger picture. New Orleans was fucked up before Katrina. This was not a secret. The shame and stigma of poverty means that we turn away from it, even those of us living through it. But turning away from it doesn't make it disappear. Sooner or later, it gets revealed, like it was in New Orleans. The work we have to do is deeper than just putting band aids on the problems when they become full blown disasters. To some degree, charity is a racket in a capitalist system, a way of making our obligations to one another optional, and of keeping poor people feeling a sense of indebtedness to the rich, even if the rich spend every other day exploiting those same people. But here we are. Leo Cohen, who I consider my mentor, once told me something that he was told by a rabbi about the 8 degrees of giving in Judaism. The seventh degree is giving anonymously, so you don't know who you're giving to, and the person on the receiving end doesn't know who gave. The value of that is that the person receiving doesn't have to feel some kind of obligation to the giver, and the person given isn't doing it with an ulterior motive. It's a way of putting the giver and receiver on the same level. It's a tough ideal to reach out for, but it does take away some of the patronizing and showboating that can go on with philanthropy in a capitalist system. The highest level of giving, the eighth, is giving in a way that makes the receiver self sufficient. Of course, I do sometimes like to see where the money I give goes. When I went to Angola for the water project I was working on and got to see the new water pump and how it changed the lives of people in that village, I wasn't happy because I felt like I'd done something so great. I was happy to know that whatever money I'd given was actually being put to work and not just paying a 7 figure salary for the head of the Red Cross. And I did a documentary about it, not to glorify myself, but to spread the word about the problem and the possible solutions. That's what I tried to do with my Katrina donations and with my work for Haiti in the aftermath of their earthquake and with other causes I get involved with. I also like to make a point about hip hop by showing how so many of us give back, even when the news media would rather focus on things we buy for ourselves. But whether it's public or private, we can't run away from our brothers and sisters as if poverty is a contagious disease. That shit will catch up to us sooner or later, even if it's just the way we die a little when we turn on the television and watch someone's grandmother who looks like our grandmother dying in the heat of a flooded city while the president flies 20,000 feet over her head.